Hello and welcome to another episode of Despite the Challenges, a show where we showcase courageous people who, despite their impeding circumstances, not only they overcome them, they just don't stop there. They go out in a community and help in many ways. Today I have a guest who 4 generations have gone through domestic violence. Her 15-year-old daughter was killed by her intimate partner, and she had established a foundation in honor of her daughter. And she's here in our studio to share her story. Welcome, Mignon.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Okay, so do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, my name is Mignon Brown-Anderson, and I'm the founder and president of the Lakeisha Brown Foundation. I started the Lakeisha Brown Foundation 8 years ago when my 18-year-old daughter Lakeisha was murdered by her boyfriend. Through that tragedy, God spoke to me and said that I had to talk about it. I had to tell about my experience because I am also a survivor of domestic violence. And so I have been in the community in Washington. We're located in Washington, D.C. And we just go out, we do awareness events, we do educational events and workshops on domestic violence and sexual abuse, PTSD, and self-esteem. When I was going through my domestic violence situation, even though I knew it was bad, I didn't know that I was actually a victim of domestic violence because, as you stated, all the other relationships around me were doing that. There were no healthy relationships.
So it became just as a norm.
Just the norm, yes.
Okay. First of all, I want to just step back and apologize. When your daughter was killed, she was 18.
Yes, she was 18.
I somehow misstated age 15. So I just wanted to make that correction.
Thank you.
So going back to your brought up to your early teen years, moving into 20s or so into relationships, you saw your mother as well as your grandmother experiencing the same type of abuse, violence.
Verbal abuse more so with my mom. I never seen my mom go through any physical abuse, even though she told me that she did, but she had left my dad before I really have any recollection of that.
Okay.
But when she left my dad, we ended up moving into my grandmother's home. And there was other family members there, so older cousins and an aunt, and I also seen them go through those cycles of abuse with their partners.
Okay. How did that shape your perception of relationships?
I thought that's what you did in relationships. I thought that if you didn't argue and fight, that they didn't love you. I thought it was an expression of love. And so I thought it was normal.
In some cases, a disagreement can be a healthy disagreement between two people trying to resolve issues or a different perspective. But when the disagreement or argument becomes abusive in nature, like you said, you thought that was a normal part of life.
Yeah, because I wasn't taught how to communicate. The first thing that I seen that if it didn't go your way, you put your hands up. You couldn't take on the we agree to disagree type of frame mind. It was like if you don't agree with me and I'm upset, the first thing I'm going to do is lash out at you.
Okay. So and that's, you started accepting that as a normal part of the relationship. Would you like to share some of the events, moments, or stories they were devastating enough that didn't make sense, that it means love, it means affection?
Absolutely. I first experienced my first domestic violence situation when I was 16 years old, where my boyfriend, he had actually choked me. And I didn't tell my mom
Hmm.
about it. And I didn't tell her about it because I didn't want her to tell me to leave him alone. So I hid it.
Uh-huh.
Um, After that, we got into some scuffles and things like that.
Hmm.
Nothing major like I went it through the latter part of my
Hmm.
life, but it set the tone. It
Hmm.
set the tone for the relationships after that. Each relationship after that became worse until even
Oh,
where I married my abuser.
and okay, so between your marriage and prior to your marriage, you were experiencing sort of the dominance or aggression or anything else that comes to mind that was
Yes.
part of their part of their normal behavior, so to speak.
Yeah.
Can you share what was their explanation to it? Did you ever ask them,
Well, most of the
why do you
time,
deserve this?
Most of the time, it was the blame game.
Uh-huh.
Usually, an abuser, what they do, they make you think that because it's something that you have done, whether
Mm-hmm.
the way you have talked, your clothes that you wear, it's always pretend goes back to you and focus on you and what you made them do. So,
Okay.
in my cases with my ex-husband, a lot of our fighting and everything came about because I wouldn't let him control me. And
Mm-hmm.
we do know that in domestic violence, that is all about control. And
Absolutely.
so I used
Yes.
to always, speak up for myself and say things like that. And then it became a battle.
Okay.
I even remember before I even married my husband,
Uh-huh.
we had been through some domestic violence issues. I remember he was telling me that his sister was more like a mother to him. She had
Mm-hmm.
raised him and everything. And he was telling me a lot of good things about her. And so like within 2 months within our relationship, I had the opportunity to meet his sister.
Mm-hmm.
And we were out on a day trip, just, hanging out, and they started arguing with one another, and he called her the B word. And so I'm like, wow,
Oh.
you told me that this woman meant so much to you. How can you talk to her like that? And he looked at me, he pulled the car over, and he went into the trunk of his car, and he got this little small mini baseball bat out, and he
Oh.
hit me in the head with it, and he told me to mind my business. And at that time,
Just like that?
just like that, just like that. And I was in the car, and I couldn't believe what had happened. And I told him I wanted him to take me home, which he did. When he took me home, he actually took me to my sister's house, and my mom was there, and she was like, "What happened?" And I said, "He hit me in my head with a stick." And she was like, "You need to leave him alone. He's no good for you." But I didn't want to hear that. I was just thinking, "Oh, she just don't want me to be happy. This is what we go
Hmm.
through. I caused this. I should have never got involved between him and his sister." And so it's just the mentality of that. I felt this. I felt as though that it was more so something wrong with him than it was with me. And I felt as though that I can help him.
Okay. All right. So that was sort of a turning point for you,
It
and
was.
and accepting that the relationship doesn't have to be violent.
Yes.
Okay.
I did. I accepted that it didn't have to be violent, but I thought that I could change him.
Okay.
And even after that first incident where he hit me in the head with a stick, there was plenty more incidents after that.
Mhm.
I was pushed out of a moving car,
Oh.
and this is all after. And all of these things happened to me before I said I do. I still married this guy, even though all of the abuse that I went through.
uh, pushed being pushed out of a moving car,
Hmm.
that can be very tragic as
Yes.
well. You don't know what's coming in from
No.
either direction.
No, you
Yeah.
don't. And what happened to me that day when he pushed me out, we were at a girlfriend's house at a cookout, and he got mad because my girlfriend had called me over to introduce me to a local celebrity that was there with his manager. And he was upset. And so he came over, he said he was leaving. So I'm like, well, that's my ride. I have to go. So when I went to the car, I got in, and he started
Mm.
calling me all these names and calling me,
Putting you down.
yeah, putting me down, belittling me, calling me
Mm-hmm.
all these different types of names. And I'm like, why are you doing this? What is going on? He was like, you're going to get out of my car. And I'm like, I'm not getting out. And so he proceeded to take my seatbelt off, open the door, and push me out. And I didn't know what happened. Only thing I knew is that when I looked up, I was on the pavement, and I looked up and I seen these brake lights coming back at me. The first thing I thought is that he's going to run me over. So I jumped up out of the street. I'm on the side of the road. He gets out the car, and then he pushes me over the guardrail. And my mentality at that time is because this guy knew that anytime we would go through something, that he would buy me, he would bring back the gifts after that, apologizing.
Mhm.
So at that time, I had on designer glasses and gold earrings that he had just purchased. And once he pushed me over the guardrail, I got up, the glasses were gone, and one earring was gone. And the only thing that I could say to him was, "You see what you did? I lost
Hmm.
my Chanel glasses and my gold earring." And then he says, "Get in the car." And I get in the car with
First, he
him.
pushed out of the car. Okay. Even at that point, you were thinking of, um, that's all right if he did.
I just wanted to work. I just had
You
wanted to
wanted to
work
work.
so much because I had told everybody like how good of a guy he was.
So you were
So
you're feeling that you are in love with him,
yes, yes,
not knowing, not having much of um, a background, or I shouldn't say background, but the experience from parents or a close network, what love means. And
yes,
love is, of course, forgiveness, but love is also
yes. It was.
taking care of
Yes, I had a.
each other.
Yes, I had a very tarnished view
Hmm.
of what
Love
love
is.
looks like.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And that is sadly is the case with many uh, couples who are in relationships at a very early age, at very early on the onset of the relationship, while they are trying to work out things. The love definition can be very confusing
Yes.
for anyone,
Yes.
regardless of where you come from.
Yes.
Regardless of your culture, socioeconomic, or religion, or whatever.
Yes.
It's the whole concept of love
Absolutely.
that what you understand. So you being pushed out of the car was, did you sustain any injuries out of?
I did to my right thigh at the
Mm,
next day. I didn't go to the hospital, of course, at that time. But the next day I had a bruise on my thigh from my knee all the way
mm-hmm,
up.
mm-hmm,
And so of course I hid it. It was the summertime. You know, most
mm-hmm.
victims do hide bruises and things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I hid it from everybody because it was so high up on my thigh.
Mm-hmm.
I could hide
You
it.
could hide it.
Yes, I did a lot of that.
So just like physical signs of abuse, as a bruise or um, a blue marks or anything like that, you could hide, but what's inside, how do you deal with that?
At the time when I was dealing with him, he pushed me into my spirituality because I couldn't believe that God was allowing me to go through so much pain. Like, even though I was
Hmm.
dressed up on the outside, I was dying on the inside.
Inside.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I grew up in the church and everything. So I
Mm-hmm.
had a foundation of who God was. So I went back to that foundation.
Okay.
I started reading more. I started going to church more. I started to find out who I was and, just finding out things more about me. And that really helped me. And through that, I started loving myself more
Mm-hmm.
and start stating to myself that I don't deserve this. Because at first, with my husband, after I married him after the
Mm-hmm.
abuse, I thought that I could save him. He was a person that grew up, he didn't grow up with God in his life.
I
He didn't
see.
have that. So I thought that if I loved him enough, if
You're,
I would create this perfect environment for him, that he would love me.
so you were feeling sort of accountable for his well-being
Yes,
and the happiness in the relationship.
yes,
And spirituality and going back to God was more of an endurance process for you than any change happening on the
yes,
other side.
yes. I thought that if he could see me and he
Mm,
could see me going and serving God and
mm-hmm,
loving God, that he would say, I want that.
mm-hmm,
I want some of that. And even though he had expressed to me when I was doing my journey of finding God for myself, he used to always say these things. He used to always say to me is that don't leave me. And I used to be like, what do you mean by that?
mm-hmm.
He said, because I see that you're growing.
Oh, I see. That's scary
Yeah, he said,
for
I see
someone
that you're
who's
yes,
controlling.
yes. He said,
Okay.
I see that you're growing and don't leave me. And so when he said those things to me, I was like, he do get it. But
Uh-huh.
he was broken himself. I had came from a broken household. My father wasn't there. So at the time I didn't know that I had abandonment and rejection issues and feelings of being unloved. And
Mm-hmm.
even with him, he grew up in an environment where he felt abandoned and rejected. He found out that his dad had committed suicide, and he had took on all those things. Even though he had never laid eyes on his dad, he took on all those burdens of what the family spoke about his father. So it was like two
Hmm.
broken people coming together, trying to be whole with all these issues, and it was just like a perfect
This
storm.
that is no easy process.
Not at all.
Were there any moments where you felt that, oh, I won? I made a little dent into his um, thinking process, or um, the moments when you say that you think he got it, but it didn't really was sustaining,
Absolutely.
right?
It was it was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One moment he got it, he understood,
Mm-hmm.
and the next moment he had no understanding. He had no understanding at all because we will always revert back. And even like 2 years into the marriage, the physical abuse stopped,
Okay.
but the verbal abuse increased.
Increased. Okay, so it was just a shift from.
It was just a shift. He had
Okay.
always been verbal abusive,
Mm-hmm.
but then it was the physical. And then once the physical stopped, and that's only because I had to threaten him. He was the type of person, he didn't want to go to jail. And I didn't
Mm.
want to send him to jail. I wanted him
Understood.
to be there with me to
Mm-hmm.
help me
Yeah.
for our family. And so it was the verbal abuse. And I used to hold that over his head. I used to, if he would, get into a rage or something that I seen, I'd be like, I'm going to call 911. They're going to lock you up. And he was like, I'm not going to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And then so at that time, when I started using that over him, it's like the transferring of energy started happening. I started becoming the abuser. I started the lashing out.
Oh.
I started the verbal abuse until it even landed me in prison one day.
Oh
One
my
day, and I just want to
goodness.
share this story with you. One day I was at home working in my home office, and we only had one car at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And so my daughter Lakeisha, the one that's deceased, she was at a girlfriend's house over the weekend, and it was time for us to pick her up that Sunday. She called and she said she was ready. So I was down in the basement. My husband was in the kitchen. I said, hey, babe, we got to go and pick up Keisha. And I don't know what had him upset that day, what made him mad. We hadn't been through anything. But he hollered downstairs to me. He said, tell her dad to go pick her up. Well, at this time, her dad was living in Atlanta, Georgia. We're
Hmm.
in Maryland. And so I'm like, I didn't hear you clearly. Let me go upstairs. So when I went upstairs, I put my papers down, but I still had my ink pen in my hand.
Hmm.
So I go upstairs in the kitchen and I asked him, I said, now, what did you say? He turned around, he looked at me and he said, tell her father to go get her. And he turned his back on me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's when my rejection issues kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
And before I knew it, my hand was up in the air and the ink pen was in his back. And so what
Mm.
he did, he turned around, he turned around and he looked at the wound and he looked at me and he said, you know what? Today you're going to go to jail for all women who think they can put their hands on a man. And he
Okay.
left, he called his mom. His mom came and picked him up and took him right down to commissioner's office and filed the report and had a protection order against me and also had a warrant for my arrest and for an assault against
Okay.
him.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the next day when they came and the police did come, they came and they apprehended me. They took me to the station. And in that jail cell is when I realized I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I can't. I said, my children, I thought about my children and my family. That's the first time when I really thought how serious this is.
Okay.
This is really, really serious.
So, in other words, that over the years, the piling up of that anxiety and stress and hurt and pain when you saw that physical abuse stopped and you started gaining that control a little bit for your protection,
Mm-hmm.
and it came out with rage,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So this is something, I mean, under the moment, anything can happen. Anything can happen. It could be either one, you know, but it leaves wounds even deeper than before,
Mm-hmm.
right? So your whole life changes from that point on.
It does. At that point, I realized that I couldn't do this anymore.
Mhm.
And even with all my spirituality, what was holding me on to the marriage and about, you're not supposed to get divorced. And I even went to my church family when I was going
Mhm.
through this. And at this time, domestic violence is not really being talked about the way it should be.
Yes. Mhm.
So back
Mhm.
then, they really wasn't discussing domestic violence. And so I went to my church family and everything, and I was telling them about the things that I was going through. And it was just only a matter, we'll just pray. And I was like, I'm
Mhm.
praying, but this is still happening to me. What else do I do? And I had to search deep within myself, and I,
Mhm.
I was like, where are the women and the people that's going to speak truth to this
Mhm.
of what's going on?
Mhm.
There was no one at that time.
At
And
that
even
time.
myself, because with domestic violence, there's so much shame and
Yes.
guilt that goes
Yes.
along with it.
Yes.
And so it keeps you in that fog for so long. But I knew I wanted something better, and I knew that I had to get out
Yes.
of that marriage.
And especially when a person experiences and their mindset of a relationship becomes, this is how the relationships are. See, you don't experience or witness any healthy relationships, and perception becomes that this is how it is. So, is it all what marriage or relationship are about? Control and violence and putting each other down, things like that. I'm sure emotionally it can be very devastating for anyone,
Yes.
regardless of their age, at
Yes.
what age they are at, either early in a relationship or many years in a relationship. Emotionally, it can be really difficult to endure. So once you're realizing and you're not getting much support from your spiritual family, from your church family, and then what's next?
Then what's next? I did finally. Oh well, my children. My
Mm-hmm.
children were there when I first met this guy. My children was 8 and 10 years old,
Mm-hmm.
so they witnessed a lot of the verbal abuse. They
Unfortunately.
never seen any of the fighting, but they seen a lot of the verbal abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to always tell my children. I used to always try to tell them because they would be upset. They would see, me going through these things with my husband, and so of course it grew a hatred for him.
Okay.
They grew a
Yes.
hatred
Mm-hmm.
for him because it wasn't their biological dad. Um, they always wanted to leave, but I just kept holding on. And I used to always tell them, this will not always be our situation. But what I realized is that speaking something and your actions are two different things. And so they were going off my actions. And so it even led where, with my daughter, when she got to an age and then she started dating guys
Mm-hmm.
or becoming interested in guys, she met this guy at 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And she started going through the same thing that I was going through because it started getting back to me. We knew about they were having some violent altercations
Hmm.
in their relationships.
Okay.
And at that time, we all stepped in, even my husband at that time. My husband stepped in, I stepped in, and also my daughter's father. We got the police involved. I was trying to do everything for her of what I wanted someone to do for me. So, and I did that, but at that time it was already too late. She was already accustomed to this is the norm. Because
Hmm.
remember, I have a sister. My sister was going through domestic violence. Her godmother, she was seeing the same thing that I seen as a child. So then
Your
again,
mother, your grandmother,
yes,
now
now
yourself and the daughter.
yes, and those generational curses. So now they're on her. And so now she's out here, she's thinking it's okay for her to be in a relationship with a guy that may push her or punch her or do things like that.
And then expect that he would still take care and love. But that's
Exactly.
okay. It's
Yes.
payoff of the love.
Yes. So she met him when she was 14, and 4 years later, she was dead by him. He was actually the one who murdered her. So,
Sad.
very sad. Very sad. Very sad. And at that time, when I lost my daughter to it, that's when I said I could no longer be silent. God showed me that I will be a mouthpiece, that I will go out here and I will talk about domestic violence, and I will share my story of what happened to me, and how when you don't deal with those things, how it can be carried on to the next generation, because our children are watching everything.
I admire you for the endurance that you've been through.
Thank you.
And tell me a little bit about the foundation that you created.
The foundation, okay. I wanted to do something. Well, God told me that I would do something because I didn't want my daughter's death to be in vain. I couldn't sit back and just say, okay, that happened to her and that's it. It was something in me that
One
said,
of the that's it.
yes, it was something in me that said, you have to do more. So I created an organization, the Lakeisha Brown Foundation, and the organization was founded to eradicate domestic violence, where we will go out and talk to young girls and young women, the ages between 14 and 21.
So that's usually at the schools or
Yes.
churches or
Yes.
okay.
Yes, right there at that age, because she was 14 when it started with her. So those are the ages that you're getting involved with young men. And so there's some things that you need to know. So what we do, we have incorporated workshops that we do.
Okay.
Because even with me, I found out that my self-esteem, for me to allow someone to treat me like that my self-esteem was very low. And even though I never knew that, because who wants to say they don't love themselves? But your action shows that when you don't love yourself. So that's what we do now. We go and we talk to churches and schools and group homes, and we bring them self-esteem workshops. We do domestic violence workshop, also sexual abuse, suicide, and depression, bullying, and all those things that our young children are going through these days, to be able to give them a way out.
Yes, and there are better ways to resolve the differences.
Yes.
We all have differences, and they always will be differences. But I always say that there are civil ways to deal with the conflicts. It doesn't have to be violence or abuse. We need to train them. I personally feel that, as you know, that I advocate domestic violence awareness and prevention, and I feel that the adolescence, the early teen is the right age where both young men and young women need to be taught. And as in a older generation, I feel that it is our responsibility to give them that kind of guidance and mentoring and support, and open a door for the dialogue to have them come back to and trust someone to go back to if they are facing some issues, so they can clarify and understand relationships better. Is there anything else that's important to you and you would like to share with our viewers?
Yes. I just want to share with our viewers about domestic violence, just to let them know that it is definitely a serious matter, and that we have to have more conversations like this. And even in the home, we have to get back to that kitchen table and talking about these issues with our children, to let them know, because if we don't give them the tools that they need within inside the household, when they go out into the world and have to deal with these things, they're not going to know how, and then they're going to hide it from their parents.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I know it's very hard to open up your heart and your life story to the rest of the world. It takes a lot of courage, and everything else that you're doing and everything else that you have endured. I really admire you, and I wish you a lot of luck with your future as well as the foundation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Okay. For our viewers, I am host Ritu Chopra. Until next time.